Her baby was dying in the cold, until he came out of nowhere. Part 1. The Frozen Wasteland Captain. Marcus Kane pressed his face against the viewport of his damaged cargo hauler, watching the endless white expanse of Cryon 7 stretch below. His ship had been running supplies to mining colonies. When the distress beacon pierced through the static, most pilots would have ignored it. Cryon 7 was a death trap, a frozen world where temperatures dropped so low that even advanced life support systems failed within hours. But Marcus had heard something in that signal that made his blood freeze. A baby's cry, faint but unmistakable, buried beneath layers of interference. His ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere, ice crystals forming on the hull despite the thermal shielding. The beacon's source lay somewhere in the shattered peaks, a mountain range where crystalline formations created natural shelters, but also deadly mazes that had claimed countless explorers. Marcus had served in the Terran Defense Corps for 15 years before becoming a freelance hauler. He'd seen battles across 12 star systems, watched entire fleets burn in the void. But nothing had prepared him for the sound of a child in distress. His own daughter, Lily, had died in a plague outbreak on New Geneva 3 years ago. The memory still haunted his dreams. The ship's sensors detected a heat signature in a narrow canyon between two massive ice formations. Marcus guided his vessel down through howling winds that threatened to dash him against the crystal walls. His landing thrusters fired desperately, melting patches of ancient ice. As he touched down in the only clearing large enough for his ship outside, the temperature read -80 degrees Celsius. Even in his environmental suit, Marcus felt the cold seeping through the insulation as he trudged through knee-deep snow toward the heat signature. The wind carried strange harmonics, almost like singing, but alien in its structure. He found them huddled in a cave carved from blue-white crystal that seemed to glow with its own inner light. A tall, slender alien female with silver skin and elongated limbs held a small bundle against her chest. Her species was unknown to Marcus, but her desperation was universal. The child in her arms was clearly dying, its faint bioluminescent patterns flickering like a failing light. The alien mother looked up at Marcus with large, opalescent eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She spoke in a melodic language he didn't understand, but her meaning was clear. She was pleading for help. Marcus knelt beside them, his medical scanner revealing the harsh truth. The infant's core temperature was dropping rapidly, and its alien physiology was shutting down system by system without immediate intervention. It would die within the hour. The mother continued her alien lullaby, tears freezing on her silver cheeks as she sang to her dying child. Marcus felt something break inside his chest. He couldn't save Lily, but maybe he could save this one. The desperate rescue. Marcus activated his suit's emergency medical protocols, extending a portable thermal field around the alien mother and child. The temperature inside the bubble rose quickly, but the infant's vital signs remained critically low. His scanner indicated the child needed specialized care that his basic medical kit couldn't provide. The alien mother, who he decided to call Vera for simplicity, watched his every movement with intelligent eyes. She seemed to understand that he was trying to help, though she remained tense and ready to flee if necessary. Marcus spoke softly, using the universal tone that transcended species barriers. His ship's medical bay was primitive compared to hospital facilities, but it had saved his life more than once during his military service. Marcus gently gestured toward his vessel, then pointed to the child. Vera hesitated for a long moment, her alien features showing the same conflict every parent faced when trusting a stranger with their child's life. Finally, she nodded and allowed Marcus to help her to her feet. The journey to his ship was treacherous, with ice winds threatening to knock them down with every step. Marcus shielded them both with his body, his suit's power reserves draining rapidly to maintain the thermal field. Inside the ship, Marcus quickly activated the medical bay's atmospheric controls, adjusting the environment to support the alien physiology his scanners had detected. He'd dealt with 17 different alien species during his military career, and while this one was new to him, the basic principles of emergency medicine remained constant. The infant, who appeared to be female based on the bioluminescent patterns, was suffering from severe hypothermia and what looked like malnutrition. Her alien biology processed nutrients differently than humans, but Marcus's medical computer began analyzing her blood chemistry and suggesting compatible supplements. Vera remained close, her melodic voice continuing the alien lullaby that seemed to comfort the child. Marcus noticed that the infant's bioluminescent patterns grew slightly brighter when her mother sang, suggesting an emotional or psychic connection between them. Working quickly but carefully, Marcus established IV lines and began warming the child's core temperature using controlled thermal therapy. His hands, steady from years of field medicine, worked with practiced precision despite the emotional weight of the situation. As the child's condition slowly stabilized, Marcus turned his attention to Vera. She was clearly exhausted and showed signs of exposure, though her species seemed more resistant to cold than humans. He offered her warm liquids and basic nutrition supplements while monitoring both patients. Through gestures and simple drawings on his tablet, Marcus began to understand their situation. Vera's people lived on a warmer moon of Cryon 7, but some kind of conflict had forced her to flee with her child. She'd been traveling in a small escape pod when it crashed during the ice storm. Marcus felt a familiar rage building inside him. Wars between species, political conflicts, territorial disputes, they all had one thing in common. The innocent always suffered the most. Building trust. 3 days passed as Marcus tended to his unexpected patients aboard his ship. The child, whom Vera called Zani in her musical language, had recovered enough to cry occasionally, a sound that both broke and mended something in Marcus's heart. Her bioluminescent patterns now pulsed with healthy rhythms, creating beautiful light shows across the medical bay walls. Vera had proven to be remarkably adaptable, learning basic human gestures and even attempting to speak a few words in standard Terran. Her intelligence was obvious, and Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying their attempts at communication. She had shown him images on a salvaged data pad, pictures of her home world, with its floating cities and bioluminescent forests. The storm outside had finally begun to subside, but Marcus made no move to leave. His cargo run could wait. These two needed him, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was doing something that mattered beyond mere survival. Vera had begun helping with ship maintenance, her long fingers proving surprisingly adept at working with human technology. She seemed fascinated by everything, asking questions through gestures and expressions that Marcus found himself understanding more easily each day. One evening, as Zani slept peacefully in the makeshift crib Marcus had constructed, Vera approached him with something in her hands. It was a small crystalline pendant that glowed with soft blue light, the same color as her daughter's bioluminescent patterns. She pressed it into Marcus's palm and spoke in her musical language, but this time, Marcus thought he caught a few familiar sounds. "Thank you," she seemed to be saying, though her pronunciation was beautifully alien. Marcus accepted the gift with reverence, understanding its significance. In his military days, he'd learned that most intelligent species had rituals for honoring those who saved children. This pendant was likely a sacred object, passed down through generations. That night, Marcus dreamed of Lily for the first time in months without waking up screaming. Instead, he dreamed of teaching her to pilot a ship, showing her the wonders of the galaxy that stretched beyond their small colony world. When he woke, Vera was sitting nearby, humming her lullaby while Zani played with a string of lights Marcus had rigged for her entertainment. The alien mother looked at him with those opalescent eyes and smiled, an expression that transcended species boundaries. In that moment, Marcus realized that his definition of family had just expanded beyond anything he'd previously imagined. They were no longer strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were survivors who had chosen to trust each other in a universe that rarely rewarded such faith, but their peace was about to be shattered. Marcus's long-range sensors had detected incoming ships, and their signatures were definitely military. The choicest approaching fleet consisted of 12 vessels, bearing the markings of the hegemony, a brutal alien empire that Marcus recognized from intelligence briefings during his military service. They were known for their policy of genetic purification, which was a polite term for the systematic elimination of species they deemed inferior. Marcus's blood ran cold as he realized why Vera had been fleeing. The hegemony must have targeted her home world, and she'd escaped with her child during what was likely a genocide. The pendant she'd given him wasn't just a thank you gift. It was probably one of the last artifacts of her entire civilization. Vera sensed the change in Marcus's demeanor immediately. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to deeper, more urgent colors as she looked at the sensor displays. When she saw the hegemony symbols, her entire body went rigid with terror. Marcus had a choice to make, and he had less than 6 hours before the fleet reached them. His cargo hauler was fast, but lightly armed against 12 military vessels. He wouldn't last 5 minutes in a direct confrontation. But Marcus hadn't survived 15 years of military service by fighting fair. He'd done it by being smarter, more determined, and more willing to sacrifice than his enemies. The shattered peaks offered thousands of hiding places, but they also presented opportunities for someone who knew how to think tactically. Marcus began plotting a course through the most dangerous sections of the Crystal Maze, areas where larger ships wouldn't dare to follow. Vera seemed to understand what was happening. She gathered Zani close and spoke to Marcus in her musical language. Gesturing toward the escape pods, she was offering to leave, to draw the hegemony away from him. Marcus shook his head firmly. "No," he said, one of the few words she'd learned in standard Terran. "Family stays together." The word family made Vera's bioluminescent patterns shift to warm golden hues. She nodded once, then moved to secure Zani in a protective harness, while Marcus prepared his ship for the most dangerous flight of his career. As the first hegemony scouts entered the upper atmosphere, Marcus powered up his engines and dove deeper into the crystal canyons. His ship scraped against ice walls, throwing up showers of frozen debris, but he kept flying. Behind him, he could hear the larger ships struggling to follow, their hulls too wide for the narrow passages. One by one, Marcus led them deeper into the maze, using every trick he'd learned as a military pilot. He'd studied the topographical data during their 3-day stay, memorizing every twist and turn of the crystal formations. The first enemy ship clipped a crystal spire and spun out of control, crashing into the canyon wall in a ball of orange flame. The second tried to climb above the maze, but found itself caught in the deadly ice winds that could tear apart even military-grade hulls. But there were still 10 ships hunting them, and Marcus was running out of tricks. The last stand deep in the heart of the crystal maze, Marcus found what he'd been looking for, a massive cavern, where the crystal formations created a natural amphitheater. The acoustics were perfect, and more importantly, the ceiling was supported by a single massive crystal column that had been weakened by centuries of thermal stress. Marcus landed his ship and quickly began setting up demolition charges from his emergency supplies. If he could bring down that column, he could seal the cavern entrance and buy time for a distress call. To reach the nearest Terran patrol, Vera watched him work, still holding Zani close. The infant seemed to sense the tension, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with agitation. Marcus paused in his work to touch the child's tiny hand, and her patterns immediately shifted to calmer colors. "Don't worry, little star," he whispered, using the pet name he'd called his own daughter. "Uncle Marcus won't let anything happen to you." The hegemony ships found the cavern entrance just as Marcus finished his preparations. "Their commander's voice echoed through the crystal walls, speaking in standard Terran with a mechanical accent that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Human vessel, you are harboring a fugitive from hegemony justice. Surrender the alien criminals, and you will be permitted to leave unharmed." Marcus activated his ship's external speakers. "This is Captain Marcus Kane, formerly of the Terran Defense Corps. The beings under my protection are refugees, not criminals, and they're under the protection of a human citizen." The hegemony commander's laugh was like grinding metal. "Humans, always so sentimental about inferior species. Very well, you have chosen to share their fate." The first energy blasts lit up the cavern like artificial lightning, but Marcus was already moving. His ship rose on thrusters, weaving between crystal formations as hegemony fighters poured into the space. Marcus had fought against impossible odds before, but never with so much at stake. Vera began singing again, not a lullaby this time, but something else. Something that made the crystals around them resonate with harmonic frequencies. Marcus felt the vibrations through his ship's hull and suddenly understood. Sing louder. He shouted, even though she couldn't understand his words, but she seemed to grasp his meaning, and her voice rose in volume and complexity. The crystals began to sing back, their resonance creating a feedback loop that grew stronger with each passing second. Marcus realized that Vera's people must have evolved alongside these crystal formations, developing a symbiotic relationship that the hegemony had never bothered to study. The harmonic vibrations reached a critical frequency, and suddenly the entire cavern was singing. The hegemony ships found their instruments scrambled, their targeting systems disrupted by the overwhelming acoustic interference. Marcus triggered his demolition charges. The massive column cracked with a sound like thunder, and tons of crystal came crashing down. The cavern entrance sealed itself in an avalanche of glowing stone. But not before Marcus's ship burst through the narrowing gap above the surface. The remaining hegemony ships waited, but they were too late. Marcus's distress beacon had finally reached its destination, and 3 Terran Defense Corps destroyers dropped out of hyperspace with weapons already charging. The battle was brief and decisive. The hegemony ships, caught off guard and outnumbered, chose retreat over annihilation. As the dust settled, Marcus found himself facing a familiar figure on his ship's view screen, Admiral Rebecca Stone, his former commanding officer. "Well, Kane," she said with a slight smile, "looks like retirement didn't stick." Marcus looked at Vera and Zani, then back at the Admiral. "I'm requesting asylum for 2 refugees under the Galactic Protection Accords." Admiral Stone's expression grew serious. "Granted. And Kane? The Corps could use someone with your experience. Again, we're forming a new division, Refugee Protection Services. Interested?" Marcus felt Vera's hand touch his shoulder, and he looked down at Zani's bright, trusting eyes. For the first time in 3 years, he had a purpose beyond mere survival. "Yes, ma'am. I believe I am." In the end, Marcus learned that family wasn't just about blood or species. It was about choosing to stand together when the universe tried to tear you apart, and sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could change the course of galactic history. The hegemony would learn that lesson the hard way in the years to come, as humanity and its allies began to push back against their reign of terror. But that's a story for another day.